In a truly shocking turn of events, 5 days ago, a judge over in Connecticut overturned a primary election because the evidence of ballot fraud was just so overwhelming. You heard that right. The evidence of fraud was just so unmistakable, including video footage of people stuffing dozens of ballots into the boxes, that the judge in the case had pretty much no other choice other than to just throw out the results and call for a new election. The election in question here was the city of Bridgeport's Democrat primary race for mayor, which was, at least officially, held on September the 12th. And just for your reference, Bridgeport is located in the southwestern part of the state, and it is the largest city in Connecticut, at least based on population. And this particular election had multiple different candidates, but the two major candidates were the following. You had the incumbent, Mayor Joe Ganim, who was endorsed by the local Democrat Party, and then you had the main challenger, Mr. John Gomes. And this particular election, just like many elections across the whole country now, it included thousands of absentee ballots. Specifically, according to the official tally, which came in after the polls closed, the incumbent mayor, Joe Ganim, he received 4,212 votes, of which 1,564 were by absentee ballot. Meanwhile, the challenger, Mr. John Gomes, he received 3,961 votes, of which only 861 were absentee. Meaning that in practical terms, if you look only at the people who voted in person on election day, you would find that they decidedly voted for the challenger, Mr. John Gomes. But, strangely, out of the people who voted by absentee ballots, somehow the ratio was completely flipped. Out of the absentee ballot group, the incumbent mayor got nearly twice as many votes as the challenger, which put him ahead just enough to clinch the victory by a tiny margin of just about 251 votes. However, smelling that something was perhaps fishy with these absentee ballots, Mr. John Gomes, he went ahead and he filed a lawsuit against several officials at both the city and the state level, citing improprieties with the election. And as a part of the lawsuit, Mr. Gomes presented video surveillance footage which allegedly shows unauthorized city employees depositing huge amounts of absentee ballots into the ballot drop boxes. Now, the first set of video footage appears to show this woman right here, Miss Anita Martinez. She is a city councilwoman who happens to be a big supporter of the incumbent mayor, to the point where they campaigned together, they knocked on doors together, and prior to the election, she posted this on Twitter right here, quote, "We got your back, Mayor Joseph P. Ganim. Vote top line all the way." And perhaps it's also worth mentioning that Ms. Martinez was also on the ballot during this particular election cycle. And so with that as the general background, well, take a look at the surveillance footage that was presented as evidence in court. The first video here shows footage outside a drop box on August 27th at about 5 p.m. For your reference, this ballot drop box is located at 950 Boston Avenue, right outside of a fire station. And this video, it shows Ms. Anita Martinez coming out of her black BMW and depositing what appears to be at least a dozen ballots, one after the other, into the ballot drop box before getting back into her car and driving away. We then fast forward 2 days to August 29th, and we pretty much get a repeat performance. Ms. Anita Martinez returns, deposits what appears to be at least 10 ballots, and once again drives away. Then we fast forward again to September the 4th, and Ms. Anita Martinez appears to return again, this time at night, and proceeds to deposit more and more ballots. Now here it's hard to tell how many she deposited, just because it's so dark, but we can safely say that it's more than one. Then, 2 days later, on September the 6th, even later at night, you have the same black BMW return again, and what appears to be Ms. Martinez, she gets out of the car, and once again, deposits even more ballots. And so that was Ms. Martinez. The next set of footage shows a different drop box as well as a different city employee. This woman right here, Ms. Wanda Getter, she is a city official in the city of Bridgeport. She is the vice chairwoman of the Bridgeport Democrat Party Town Committee, and also, in regards to the mayoral election, she was a supporter of the incumbent mayor. And this is the video footage that was, again, played during the trial, showing what appears to be Ms. Wanda Getter either placing multiple ballots into the ballot drop box herself, or coming up to the box with other people as they drop ballots into the box and she just watches. And this appears to be happening across multiple different days leading up to the actual election. Furthermore, this particular ballot drop box was located right outside of the City Hall building where Ms. Getter works, and so there is other footage showing Ms. Getter interacting with people inside the building before going out to either deposit the ballots herself or sometimes have someone else deposit the ballots. And just by watching the footage, you can tell that the number of votes that this represents is not small, especially given the fact that the margin of victory was just 251 votes. Now, I will quickly pause here for a moment to mention that both Ms. Martinez as well as Ms. Getter, they have both not been found guilty of anything as of yet. And of course, here in America, everyone, no matter who they are, is innocent until proven guilty. All I'm doing is I'm showing you the specific surveillance footage that was shown in the courtroom by Mr. Gomez and his legal team. This was exactly what was in front of the judge, and you can decide for yourself what it all means. However, just for your general reference, over in Connecticut, quote, state law enables absentee voting but contains multiple rules, including that a person who helps distribute more than 5 absentee applications must register with the town clerk as a distributor. However, both Wanda Getter and Anita Martinez did not register as absentee ballot distributors or sign any applications, which was required if they assisted voters, nor were they designated by absentee voters to drop off absentee ballots. Meaning that technically they could have registered as ballot distributors, but they didn't. Also, it's worth mentioning that besides these 2 women, the video surveillance footage also shows several other city council members, as well as masked individuals whose identities we can't tell, placing large amounts of ballots one after the other into the ballot drop boxes. In total, after they completed their analysis of about 2,000 hours of this footage, Mr. Gomez's campaign team, they determined that there were about 900 more absentee ballots received compared to the number of people who were seen at the drop boxes across the whole city. Here was in fact what the campaign manager for John Gomes said while speaking outside of the courtroom.
You subtract people coming up to the ballot box and doing individual, then you subtract that number. So then as you continue to subtract, you get around 900 that, how do they get to the town clerk?
And if you think about it, 900 ballots in an election where the margin of victory was only 251 votes, well, that is obviously significant. Now, for their part, during the actual trial, the 2 women in the video footage, they decided to plead the fifth in order to not incriminate themselves. Meanwhile, the incumbent mayor, he testified that he was shocked by the footage and that he had no knowledge and no involvement in the alleged scheme. Although it is interesting to note that this was not the first time that such a thing was alleged. In fact, back in 2019, there was a similar scheme to which the State Election Commission recommended that 3 people aligned with the mayor's campaign be charged for violations that were tied to, you guessed it, absentee ballots. That was again 4 years ago, back in 2019. And when he was asked about it on the stand, this time, here's what the mayor said.
The incumbent mayor, grilled by his opponent's attorneys, being questioned about a similar case in 2019. Then mayoral candidate Marilyn Moore filed a lawsuit against Scannum to get the results of the primary overturned after allegations of election fraud. That lawsuit was unsuccessful.
In the 2019 case, you actually filed a defense in that case. You through a lawyer, right?
Honestly, I don't recall.
Regardless of that, though, one other point that's perhaps worth mentioning regarding this particular incumbent mayor is his, you can say, tumultuous history in office. Here's how the New York Times described it. Quote, the incumbent mayor, Joe Ganim, was first elected in 1991 and served until 2003. He was convicted on several corruption-related charges, resigned, and spent 7 years in prison. In 2015, he mounted a comeback and has been mayor ever since. That is, if nothing else, an amazing comeback story. Regardless, getting back to the actual trial, after weighing all the evidence, the judge in the case, who just for your reference is Judge William Clark, he found the evidence compelling enough to throw out the election results and order a new election. Here is part of what the judge wrote in his 37-page order. Quote, ballots should not be touched by anyone other than those authorized by statute. Mr. Ganim was also correct to be shocked at what he saw in the video clips and evidence that were shown to him while he was on the witness stand. The videos are shocking to the court and should be shocking to all the parties. Therefore, based on the totality of the evidence presented, the court finds that the plaintiff has met its burden of proof and established substantial violations of the relevant law in placing of absentee ballots into ballot drop boxes by partisans who were not designated to handle such ballots, and that the volume of ballots so mishandled is such that it calls the result of the primary election in serious doubt and leaves the court unable to determine the legitimate result of the primary. The court orders a new primary for the Democrat Party nomination for mayor of the city of Bridgeport shall be held. Now, as you would imagine, Mr. Gomes was quite pleased with this particular ruling. Here was what he said as a part of the statement following the judge's decision. Quote, today, Lady Justice fulfilled her duty. She attentively heard the voices of the people of Bridgeport, carefully considered the facts, and impartially applied the law, as justice should always be served. The victory today belongs not only to me as the plaintiff, but to all the people of Bridgeport who were wronged in the numerous ways detailed in Judge Clark's remarkable decision. Today, democracy prevails. On the flip side, however, you had the incumbent mayor release his own statement saying that the judge's decision was substantial and that he would, quote, wait to be apprised by the lawyers as to whether or not they want to take an appeal. But in terms of the next steps in this whole drama, this is where things get a little bit weird. Because on the one hand, the judge ordered that the results of the primary election have to be thrown out and a new primary election has to be held. However, the general election happens to be tomorrow, on November the 7th, and the judge does not have the authority to change or to postpone the date of the general election. Meaning, in practical terms, that the judge, quote, ordered election officials to hold a new primary, but had no authority to postpone the general election in the meantime. And so, on Tuesday, the general election will go on as planned. Now, Bridgeport happens to be a Democrat stronghold, and so typically the way it works is that whoever wins the Democrat primary is almost certain to be the next mayor. However, take a look at the ballot that the people will have in front of them tomorrow. As you can see, for mayor, you have the following options. You have the incumbent, Mayor Joseph Gammon, as the Democrat Party candidate. You have David Hers as the Republican candidate. And then, at the bottom, the Secretary of State allowed John Gomes to enter the race as an independent candidate. And so, what will happen is, frankly, anyone's guess. Maybe the Democrat vote will be split between Gomes and Gammon, and the Republican will wind up winning, which would be a major upset. Or maybe people will be just so infuriated by all the election fraud and vote for John Gomes. Or maybe the incumbent mayor will win after all. But then, the question becomes, regardless of the outcome, when will the primary election be redone? And once it's redone, will the general election have to be redone as well? In short, what's currently happening over in the city of Bridgeport was, I believe, summed up quite well by a state representative when he said this, quote, obviously, we're in very uncharted legal waters here. That, indeed, they are. All we know for certain is that the judge in the Connecticut Superior Court found enough concrete evidence of ballot fraud to overturn the primary election. In terms of what happens next, well, we'll just have to wait and see. If you'd like to go deeper into this particular case, I'll throw all my research notes, including a link to the full-length video of the ballot drop box surveillance footage. You can find it all in the description box below this video, and you can check it out at your own leisure. Furthermore, because what took place over in Bridgeport, I believe, is such a fascinating microcosm of our whole election system, I was thinking of taking my crew over to Connecticut and doing a deep dive on that particular election, because there are so many facets to the story, half of which we're not even able to fit in today's episode. And I'd like to personally go there and uncover what is truly happening. And so, let me know, would you be interested in such a special deep dive episode? Please tell me in the comments section below. I'll be reading through your responses tonight as well into the week. I'd love to know whether you'd like to see that. Otherwise, if you'd like to dig a little bit deeper into this whole Dropbox business as it relates to the entirety of the country, well, you're in luck, because several months ago, I did a deep dive episode covering exactly that. If you'd like to watch that earlier episode, it's exclusively over on Epic TV. I'll throw a link to it. It'll be right there at the top of the description box below. I hope you check it out. And then, until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epic Times. Stay informed. Most importantly, stay free.